Thank you all so much for joining us today. Before I pass it over to our amazing trainers at Housing First University, I want to give you all just a quick some background information about RIZE and our partnership with Housing First. And then I promise I'll hop off and let you guys get started with the exciting part of this training. But RIZE is the only public-private partnership that is dedicated solely to funding and creating solutions to end the overdose crisis. We aim to have everything that we do be guided by those with lived experience and who are unafraid of new ideas. RIZE uses all of this to build networks, create programming, and support organizations who are using novel approaches to end overdose and create access to treatment. We always do our best to connect ideas from diverse perspectives and across principles to allow new and novel approaches to emerge again to end overdose. And as part of this, we have now partnered with Housing First University a couple of times to provide some really excellent training to our local housing providers. Most recently, we hosted a 6-part harm reduction intensive training series that allowed participants to walk away with a better understanding of a harm reductionist approach to service provision in shelter and supportive housing context. I see a comment that someone can't hear. Is everyone else able to hear? Seeing some thumbs up.
Yes.
Okay. All right, so I will continue on. So that was a 6-part training that happened over 6 weeks in a cohort-based setting. And it was really an exciting training that allowed folks to work together and workshop some real-life examples. If you weren't able to make that training and you're interested in it, we did record all of these sessions and they are made available on our website. So in just a second here, I'll drop the link to our website in the chat so you can review those and share broadly with your colleagues or anyone who you think might be interested in that. And that series actually just concluded a couple of weeks ago now. And throughout, we heard some feedback from everyone that what they really needed next is some training on how to support clients after they're housed. And really to prevent eviction. So we partnered again with Housing First University to offer this training that you all are about to embark on today. This training will also be recorded and made available on our website. So when I drop that link in the chat after today, if you think there's any colleagues or friends or people who might be interested, please feel free to share broadly. I'm going to go ahead and hop off shortly and let you all get started. But if you have any questions, thoughts, anything about anything that RIZE is doing, please always feel free to reach out. And additionally, if there's ever any training needs that you all have, training needs that aren't being met that you think RIZE could help with, please feel free to reach out and let me know. I'll put my email in the chat and I welcome feedback and communication from you all at any time. So again, thank you all for being here on this lovely and sunny Friday morning. I'll go ahead and turn it over to Housing First. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Cassidy. Hi, everyone. It's great to be with you. Recognizing some familiar names and faces from the previous series, so that's awesome. Reconnecting with old family here, it feels like. So I just want to introduce us really quickly before we dive in. My name is Ryan Villagran. I use they and them pronouns. I'm a training specialist with Housing First University, and I participated in the last harm reduction training series. So it's once again exciting to be with you again. Really quickly, Housing First University is the Training and Technical Assistance Institute operating under the larger organization Pathways to Housing PA. So Pathways is a homeless services organization operating in Philadelphia using high fidelity housing first. To house close to 600 people now. We've been doing that work since about 2008. And so Housing First University is our opportunity to bring some of that knowledge and information that we've learned over the many years of practicing a high fidelity housing first to other communities, right? We don't want to hoard this information. So excited to be able to share it. And we do trainings kind of nationally, and even we've spoken to global audiences about some of this work. So that's always exciting. My background is mostly in mental health and recovery settings and inpatient and outpatient treatment facilities. So that's me. I want to kick it over to my co-presenter to introduce himself, and then we'll dive into some quick housekeeping.
Awesome. Good morning, everybody. My name is Khalil. My pronouns are he, him.
I've been at Pathways to Housing PA for about 1.5 years now. I am now training and doing this on a regular basis, but as recently as December, because I made the jump to the training side in January, I was leading the poly substance use team here. So a lot of what we're talking about today and just preventing eviction, I got to see and do and practice like many folks in this space. So I think we'll be speaking a lot from there, and be awesome to get folks engaged and talking about some cool stuff. My experience before Pathways was also mostly mental health and in shelter and substance use settings. So yeah, that's me. It's good to be here. I'm excited.
All right, take us through some quick housekeeping slides. It's a 2-hour training today, which I know feels long, especially in the middle, in the middle of your day when we have so many competing priorities. But just a gentle invitation to be present with us if you can, if you're able to shut off your inbox and flip over the phone. I think we'll have a fun discussion, an interesting discussion that's helpful to us as well. We're able to offer CE credit for social workers. So if you are a social worker seeking CE credit, a couple of things that the ASWB asks of us that allow us to be accredited and provide that CE credit. Cameras on for those folks, stay in the whole time, participating in any discussions that we open up, as well as responding to any poll questions that we have. And I actually don't think we have any poll questions on this training, so we can ignore that one. Khalil and I would really appreciate and welcome questions and comments throughout, right? We don't want you to hold your questions to the end. I think if you're having something pop up into your head in terms of an idea or a question or a comment, other folks may be having that as well, right? We've got a lot of people on the call today. So I think we could all benefit by sharing knowledge, sharing best practices. So put your questions in there. We do have the Q&A box open, or you can use the chat box. For folks who are interested in having a certificate, whether that be just like a participation certificate or a CE credit certificate, make sure you complete the course evaluation. So we'll drop a link to a short Google survey in the chat right at the end. And it won't take you very long to complete that survey, to give us some feedback on the training material and our presentation. And that'll be how you'll select an option to receive a certificate. Even if you don't want a certificate and don't care about a certificate, we would really appreciate your feedback. I think we learn and grow from all of that feedback and iterate on our content that way. So it helps us quite a bit. We really welcome that. The closed captioning is available to you if that's helpful. You can switch it on yourself using the Show CC option on Zoom. And if you have other accommodation needs, I want you to please feel free to privately chat one of us, and we'll see what we can do to help you meet that need as we go on the fly. All right, diving into the work today. Really quickly, our agenda. We're going to do some welcome and introductions. I'm interested in seeing who's here and from where and what eviction sort of issues are popping up in your setting. We're going to do quite a bit of setting expectations. I think this is hard work, this eviction prevention discussion that we're doing, because it's so kind of specific to the person we're serving, and it's specific to our setting. And I wish I could solve all the problems for everybody in the room, but I think there's going to be such a diversity of challenges that you're wrestling with that I think we're going to have to, in some ways, keep it broader around best practices. And hopefully we can do some critical thinking around how do we take this best practice and apply it to my specific setting, my specific individual that I'm serving, my context, my funding streams, et cetera. We're going to spend quite a bit of time on just like preventing and responding to eviction as the work, right? That's what we want. We're here to do this specific work of keeping people off the streets, right? We don't want people to be homeless. That's why we're doing this work. And so we'll talk about how we do that. We'll talk about the critical role of communication. In all of our trainings, I think this gets frustrating for audiences sometimes, but people are like, this thing is happening. What's the solution, right? What's my if then? And often we spend a ton of time talking about like, let's back it up, right? Before we ever get there, we need to lay this groundwork of communication and expectations with our participants so that things are really clear. And that when it comes time for eviction, we've done everything that we could to prevent that, understanding that sometimes it's unavoidable. We'll talk about the role of harm reduction. don't want to neglect that. We spent this whole long series talking about harm reduction already, and want to bring that into the conversation around eviction prevention, because we see harm reduction in this broader way to prevent eviction. We'll talk about the critical practice of developing mutual agreements to maintain tenancy. This is an agreement between us and the participants. What does that look like? How do we construct an agreement like that? And how can it be effective? We'll offer some final thoughts and have time for Q&A. In terms of learning objectives, we want you to be able to walk away from this session today with kind of 3 critical things. We want you to be able to describe the role of harm reduction in supportive housing work, understanding that harm reduction is a nuanced practice. So, we'll talk about the importance and the way we use harm reduction, but that doesn't mean that you're going to feel prepared necessarily, if you're not already using harm reduction, to do it tomorrow. But I think you'll have a starting point. We want you to be able to identify common tenancy challenges and practical strategies for mitigation. And you probably already can identify those tenancy challenges in your own setting, but we'll offer kind of an expanded conversation there. And we'll spend some time practicing actually developing mutual agreements to maintain housing, and actually kind of the language that we use here. Maybe you've got other language that you use in your setting. All right, who's here? Tell us about yourself if you wouldn't mind. We got 96 people on the call today, so would love to just drop in the chat, maybe your name, your agency where you're working from, your job title, and maybe a couple of common reasons why your participants typically face eviction. What are the ones that seem to happen most frequently in your setting? What are the challenges that you really wrestle with on a day-to-day basis to help keep people housed? That's a lot we're asking, so I'll give it a second. I'll be silent for a little bit while folks type their answers. All right, and I'm just going to highlight some of the common tenancy challenges that are popping up as they start to roll in here. So, non-payment of rent. Absolutely, if you're not paying your rent, it's going to be hard to stay housed. Frequent hospital visits, yes, and of course there are some rules in programs that if you're out of the home for a certain length of time, you potentially could lose that subsidy, right? Having people staying or living with them that aren't on the lease. Yes. This challenge of once I get housed, how amazing that is for me. Let me bring my closest friends and loved ones too, right? Hard to fault people for that, but it does become a challenge. Foot traffic. Yes. And neighbors complaining, landlords complaining. Is it, drug related traffic that has this additional component for people? Yeah. Okay, yes. My clients come from different backgrounds and usually have barriers that landlords fear can be risky. And so this is kind of like a preventative thing that landlords do, but that is really harmful overall, right? I don't want anybody with a criminal legal history coming here, or I don't want anybody with X, Y, and Z eviction history. Even though we know that with the right support, we can help keep people safe and housed, that represents a risk to some landlords that they're unwilling to undergo. Goodness, yes. Eviction for substance use or severe mental illness. Okay. Landlords selling buildings. Yeah, this gentrification issue. Evictions for non-payment. Evictions for cause. Non-payment of rent. Gosh, so many good ones here. Significant mental health challenges, which can lead to for cause or non-payment evictions. Yeah. Shelters can be challenging. Absolutely. My goodness, you all are typing so much. I'm having a hard time keeping up. I'll just highlight a couple of more here. It's great to see these. Substance use, lease violations, hoarding. Such a tough challenge. How do we keep people safe when hoarding is a part of their their experience. High foot traffic, excessive noises or disturbances, not keeping the unit clean, pest infestations, excuse me. Yeah, so many good ones here. So many common ones, I'll say. Outpricing the vouchers. This one makes me incredibly mad. We've got these fair market rates that we go by. And then landlords continue to like raise their rents. And sometimes I think that's intentional, right? It's a way of saying, yeah, I'll rent to anybody, but you got to pay this much. And sort of knowing that that's going to be too much for many of our folks to manage. Calling the fire department when you take a shower. Oh my goodness. Okay, lack of support and resources and substance use disorder, life crisis stuff. Yeah. Great. These are so good. People requiring credit reports when they're on a voucher anyway. Like, yeah, these other barriers that we see that are like, why is this in place? Like, why, you know, they're going to have the support of a program. Do you really need to do all that? Yeah, that's so frustrating. All right. Thank you so much for sharing some of this. It's super helpful to see kind of what you're working with. A lot of the same challenges that we're working with. I think we'll be on the same page. Oh no. Living with a family of raccoons in the attic. I don't, does that sound, do I kind of want some of that lifestyle? Do I want more of that in my own life? I'm not sure yet. Okay. Let me move us on. So you've shared a little bit about you and your context and some of the challenges that you're dealing with. I'll just really briefly talk about Pathways and kind of how our context looks. As I mentioned, we were founded in Philadelphia in 2008. We use the high fidelity housing first model. We're serving actually closer to 600 participants now. And so in our setting, we do that in a scattered site way. I wonder if there are many folks that are also doing scattered site. I know there's a number of like residential building sort of programs that exist out there too. But we prefer the scattered site model, which is high fidelity housing first. And we also use this component of master leasing. So I know that that could be a difference for many programs out there. And what I mean by that master leasing piece is that we are the primary leaseholders with landlords, right? And then we sort of sublease using a use and occupancy agreement. And so all of these challenges around criminal background history, eviction history, things like this, we get to sort of sidestep that using the master leasing component. And let me be really clear here. When I talk about Pathways in the context of this training and as we move forward, I just want to say that this is just how we do it. And I want to invite you and encourage you to think critically about kind of what are the strategies versus like what are the resources. I think sometimes people yell at us and say, well, we don't have that. We can't do that. And so I want us to think about the principles behind those strategies and what might work in your context. I'll also say this is permanent supportive housing. That's our framework, which includes wraparound supports in the form of an ACT team around every participant. And so in our setting, we have over 140 staff at Pathways doing this work. In terms of setting expectations for how we'll approach our conversation today, I want to talk about kind of the philosophy and core values. And I think if you have different philosophy and core values, please put this in the chat. Like if you see something on the screen here that says, well, that's not how we operate. I would love to see that, right? So that we get some level setting on, we're on different pages here, right? Number one, we believe everyone deserves a safe and permanent place to live. Everybody means everybody, right? Whether that be drug users or people with eviction histories, people from various marginalized identities, everyone deserves a safe and permanent place to live. That's just our starting point, right? And kind of tagging off of that, housing is a basic human right. We believe that it is a basic human right, not a privilege. And so when we see programs that sort of ask for people to sort of meet key thresholds of readiness before being afforded housing, we see that as more of a privilege sort of set up as opposed to a basic human right one, right? So sort of whatever you're walking in the door with, you should have access to housing. And as part of that, we believe in the inherent worth and dignity of all people. Part of the reason why we do this housing first type work, right? Give people a house and then figure out all the stuff around maintaining tenancy, right? Which is going to be challenging because of what people are walking in the door with, right? In terms of trauma and history. But that treatment, that recovery is going to happen more easily when people have a safe and stable place to live, right? And so kind of flipping the script on what our society at large sort of says, which is demonstrate your readiness, demonstrate that you're sober, demonstrate that you are ready to take care of your mental illness, and then you'll be ready for a house. We say, no. Somebody's going to be much more likely and able to deal with their mental health, to deal with their substance use, to learn the skills of independent living when they have a place that is safe and stable already. It's a place with safe parameters that can hold people. It's a container for people, right? And that everybody is housing ready. It can be difficult to hear folks in housing programs say, I don't think that person is ready for housing, because we think that they are ready for housing, but it may require a really high level of supports. And so that's a lot of what we're going to talk about, is how do we wrap around that intense level of supports to allow somebody to exercise their autonomy, their self-determination, and independence. And that similarly, we think recovery is really possible for everyone. Let me just pause there for a second. Anything that feels like a little bit of a stretch to you, right? You're examining your program in context. Anything on the screen that doesn't feel quite aligned with this? Yeah, I see in the chat. Can you please send copies of the presentation? Absolutely. Right. As soon as we end this training, we'll send a PDF copy of the slides, as well as some tip sheets that could be helpful. All right. Trevor saying they agree with a lot of what's been said. Love what's been said. Cool. So that's our framework in terms of our core values, and maybe some of yours as well. Everything's good. Okay. So expectations for this training. This one I want to be like cautious about how I say it. We're not going to be able to solve everybody's eviction crises. I know you know that at baseline, but I just want to sort of restate it. Sometimes we get asked about what about this situation? What about this situation? What do you do then, right? Because people will look at like a housing first program and say, oh, what's your policy on this, right? And so unfortunately today, we're not going to offer a lot of like if-then type solutions, right? Because we get asked a lot of like, well, what if this happens? What if this happens? And the truth is there's really no kind of one tried and true approach for every housing issue or clinical issue. I know you know this, but this work is highly individualized, right? And so the program looks different from person to person, including our approach to harm reduction with various people, right? One thing we often say is the Larry rule, or we'll say no Larry rule, which is our shorthand way of saying sometimes we put policies in place that are based on this one client that was really difficult to work with back in 2016 or whatever. And so we'll put this rule in place that says, if anybody does this behavior, that's an automatic eviction. Or if they do this number of times, then we won't offer them another relocation. And so we want to kind of eliminate Larry rules, both from this training and our policies broadly. Of course, we understand that the strategies that we're going to talk about today may not be directly applicable or transferable to your program. And I would like for you to tell us so in the chat if you can, right? If we say something that you're like, that doesn't apply here because, I would love to hear that. Because there may be room for us to think creatively about, okay, how do we exercise this principle in your setting? And that the other thing that we'll say is, for this training and purposes of our discussion today, we really want to exercise a belief in and a prioritization of participant autonomy, choice, and self-determination, almost as like the primary things that we really care about for people. That will sometimes mean in people's individual decision-making, they'll make decisions that will lead to natural consequences up to and including eviction. But prioritizing autonomy, choice, and self-determination, we think is that valuable and that important. So individual effective interventions really should be individually tailored to whatever stage of change a person is in, which is going to take a ton of creativity, patience, and ingenuity to meet folks' needs. You with me so far? I know I'm offering a lot of like upfront expectations, but I think it's important. In terms of expectations for program participants, I wonder if you see this too, but one thing that we've noticed is that sometimes folks have been either living rough and outside for such a long time, or, through their circumstances, they haven't kind of developed the skills to maintain tenancy on their own independently in a place of their own. Most of our folks have never learned those basic life skills to successfully maintain an apartment. And so when we talk about the way that we provide services, sometimes it's actually habilitative care, right? Care and learning and skill development for the first time, rather than the way we traditionally conceptualize this work, which is like rehabilitative care, right? We're not really rehabilitating folks. We're helping them develop skills for the first time in some cases. And as a result of that, we have to acknowledge the bumpiness of that learning process, the kind of big learning curve that can exist for people, and approach it with a level of patience and intentionality, and normalize the challenges that people will inevitably face when they're being housed for the first time in a long time. A critical part of this is that we want to really set people up for success and explain as much as we can up front. I know this sort of goes without saying, but I want to be really clear about this. We have to provide as much information at the onset of services as possible, and being really clear about our program expectations. This is also a trauma-informed approach, right? We don't want to surprise people with policies or expectations that they haven't heard about, right? Which are going to be incredibly triggering and actually make it more difficult for them to do what's necessary to maintain their tenancy. So the clearer we are up front, the smoother things are going to be later on. And so thinking about things like, how frequently are we going to do home visits? What's it going to look like when I do a home visit, right? What's the shape of that home visit going to be? What are we going to discuss during those home visits? One way that Pathways chooses to do this, and I wonder if you have similar approaches, is to have a welcome home packet, which is kind of like a policies and procedures manual, but not really. It's much more gentle than that. It's much more kind of like, hey, you're home. How exciting. We want to celebrate you coming home. And here are some things that you should know about maintaining your apartment, right? About how to keep it clean. The example I like to give is like, there's a space for us to write in there, like what their trash day is at that particular location. The simple things that I think we sometimes forget because we've been living independently for so long, many of us, right? I don't want to assume age or experience. But so that welcome home packet can be really helpful for like level setting expectations with people. Another part of setting expectations will be to make sure folks know who to contact for what issue and when they should do that, right? And so we should be clear about the general staffing structure. I think if you're operating in a team structure like the way we are, this is especially important, right? Because I may be the one that does the home visit today, but Khalil might be the one that does it next week, right? Because we share a caseload here. And so really kind of explaining the structure of who a person might interact with and when they might interact with them. What about how to handle problems or grievances? How do we explain to folks, if you have a problem with X, you go see Y, right? Who do we call about a leak? Who do I call about a neighbor that's bothering me? Who do I call if the landlord is really being shady, right? There's so many different possible issues that can arise, but that might call for a different person to be contacted. Now, maybe you've got a streamlined process at your agency where the case manager is always the go-to, right? And then they're the ones that like kind of funnel the information through the organization. But if you're not, we want to make sure people know who to contact for what and when. We also want to make sure people know what additional supports are available to them. Do you have a mental health clinic on site? Do you have a key partnership with a substance use provider? Do you have primary care connections that you can connect people with? People really need to be aware of what's possible and what they have access to. And then kind of going along with participant choice, autonomy, and self-determination, those principles we talked about earlier, allowing folks to really guide the course of their own treatment process, their own housing process, in terms of when they're going to access supports, what those supports are going to be, at what level of intensity they want to access supports. This is really critical in our minds. However, and you may have different expectations, but there are some like hard and fast things that we can't avoid, right? We don't have many of them in a housing first type program, but being really clear about what those things are, right? So signing and adhering to a lease, that's non-negotiable. If you want to be housed in this program, you got to sign and adhere to a lease. Agreeing to receive home visits is also really critical. Otherwise, we're not really doing housing first work. We're getting people housed, but we're missing the whole half of the work that includes the wraparound services, right? And so folks have to allow us to come visit them in the home, to check on them, to see how things are going, to provide supports, to have harm reduction conversations. And then lastly, at least one of our expectations is that folks are going to contribute at least 30% of their income towards rent. Now, folks under our program it's a master leasing setup, so they're not really paying rent. We call it program contributions, but we're asking for 30%. And so these things are hard and fast and could lead to some natural consequences if these things are not met. I see Michael's question in the chat, or comment in the chat. The expectation can be challenging when a new participant doesn't have a phone or reliable means of communication. Yeah, I really want to agree with that. I wonder if maybe I can just ask Khalil to comment a little bit about this. Khalil does on his previous team, did a lot of outreach with folks who were street homeless, trying to get them in the home. And it's like, how do you coordinate services with somebody who might have a phone one day, they're not going to be the next day? I wonder if you can offer any general stuff.
Yeah, this is something that we've known from the beginning, right? Moving somebody into their homes, many for the first time, is barely 50% of the work to come, right? It's barely halfway there. And it's all these other supports that need to come afterward. So with our folks who don't have a phone or aren't able to, or we're not able to reach them, or can't keep a phone for very long, we do need to get creative with the ways we are engaging with them. Sometimes that's notes and letters in their units if we have access. Other times that's engaging in maybe a full day of street outreach if we really need to engage with them. Our team might rotate who's doing outreach for folks that we haven't seen in a while or are concerned about or need to check in with, and we know their spots. We know maybe some routes and places they hang out. We may rotate somebody just doing a full day of looking for our folks who we haven't been seeing at home. Yeah, and this really is meeting them where they are, and sometimes folks are surprised when we find them, and it opens up a whole another door and different ways to engage, and I think it's helpful. They're like, oh yeah, I'm actually on the northwest corner of Rittenhouse Square all the time. Like, perfect. This is where we'll meet next time. We'll take you home for this home visit. But yeah, it's definitely a challenge that we know and acknowledge. Also, it's much easier said, especially in a space like this, than it is to actually do it. So we hear you there for sure.
Yeah, and as a more general point, I'll say maybe it's important for programs to consider having a structure that allows staff some time to do some pounding of the pavement, right? Because if we rely on folks to like get a phone on their own and then contact us or pop into the office, we may be missing opportunities to like reconnect with folks. And so this like pounding of the pavement, what we call outreach, has been a critical part of the work. Even though like we're housing people, we're a housing program, sometimes those people fall off the map or just like not staying in their homes. I'll also say that in some cases we have really worked hard to get an old school landline installed in apartments, right? How novel to use a phone with a cord that a bill's being paid through the utilities or whatever, and that maybe we can try that way. Yeah, I'm seeing Kira's point here that most people have a routine, and so getting to know them and like where they're going to be and their patterns is really critical. It always goes back to relationship. That's a great point. Yeah, some programs using a lot of track phone. Yeah, we're constantly doing that too, like getting people signed up for these new free phones, then they lose them. It's like, let's go hop over to a different company. Let's see if we can get one through them. That is a exhausting work, but sometimes that's life-saving work, right? Having the ability to like have open line of communication with people is worth the effort, I think.
Another thing that just came to mind is our folks are also likely receiving services from other programs in the community as well. Prevention Point is a local syringe exchange and harm reduction organization here in Philadelphia. Sometimes our participants are calling from there, and sometimes we can call there to leave messages for our participants also. Folks are super resourceful, and I think will find a way when they need to reach out to the team also.
Yeah, that's a great point. I've seen other examples of these free phones. The Lifeline phone is offered up in Massachusetts. That's great. Thanks for sharing that. Okay. I want to talk quickly now about, maybe not so quickly, about some expectations that we have for landlords. And this is such a critical part of the work, is cultivating these relationships. Eviction and preventing eviction is often specifically about how we interact with our landlords, right? And so we know this is not always going to be easy. Landlords are not social workers. Landlords are not people with, a background in helping people or even necessarily a desire to help people. Although I will say most of our best landlords are ones that like have a desire to really contribute or give back in some way. And so when we can really lean on that social good, that like desire to help people, those landlords, we really want to scoop up and cultivate those relationships, right? Where people feel like they're invested in the mission as well. I will say landlords are already dealing with people who have serious mental illness and substance use disorders, but who may not even be connected to a program, right? And so the benefit that we get to provide, or the value that we get to bring into the relationship, is, hey, I know you already have people living in your spots with substance use disorder. The folks that we're working with, at least they get a team wrapped around them, right? At least you have somebody to call when there's problems that hopefully we can avoid eviction court together, right? So that's part of our pitch. Another part of our pitch is that the rent will get paid, right? And I don't know about your setting, but at least with the master leasing setup that we try and leverage, because we're the one paying the rent, you're going to get paid. You're going to get paid on time. And so that pitch is pretty crucial to cultivating this relationship. And if you want to evict our participant, that is potentially a loss of a stable source of income there for the landlord. And that's not a threat, but I think that's part of the exchange that's happening here, right? Yeah, Cynthia mentioning landlords love to hear that a client has a representative payee because they know that rent is coming on time. And yeah, we definitely do offer representative payee-ship to some of our clients. I will say check day gets kind of hectic around here as a result of that, but hey, that comes with the territory. Landlords also can expect that problematic behaviors are going to be addressed because there's somebody there looking in. There's somebody that they can go to that at least is going to make an attempt to resolve an issue. Another thing that I want programs to consider is, are there repairs that we can do on our own? This has been a crucial intervention for us. Having a housing department with maintenance staff on it is one way to really mitigate some level of eviction when folks are damaging properties. And damage to property is a very frequent and ongoing issue that we can deal with in a housing first or housing context. And so having our own maintenance department that can take care of some of those small repairs and keep things off the radar of the landlord, or something that they don't have to contract out to deal with, can be critical. I know that's a whole other like line item on the budget, but bunch of staff or whatever. We've got a couple of maintenance folks. I think we might be at 2 right now. But kind of worth its weight in gold in terms of keeping people housed. Landlords can also expect to have somebody to vent to. Maybe we're not even really doing very much sometimes, but having a person, I've been so frustrated with yada, 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 and they're also frustrated with other people that are not our participants. Having somebody to just hop on the phone with and like vent with is notable, right? We know how valuable that is in our own lives. Landlords find that valuable as well, and they don't always get that. Our housing director sometimes talks about one landlord that he works with very closely seems to not have any other friends, right? He calls and texts our director of housing very regularly. And we cultivate that relationship because he's a needed partner, a needed and critical partner in this work. Another thing that we can offer to landlords, and I want programs to consider whether this is helpful, opportunities for networking and professional development. And so sometimes we'll offer like open house events here in our offices where landlords can come together, get some food, maybe do like a meeting, a training meeting around, I don't know, maybe mental health first aid, or things like, what are the rules around involuntary hospitalization? What are the tenants' rights issues that seem to be coming up? This can be super helpful. And we have a core group of landlords that really look forward to events like this. Let me pause there. Anybody else? I've said a lot so far. Anybody else pulling in the resources of a maintenance department internally, or offering landlord events, things like that? I do see Rebecca mentioning that they have a maintenance department. It's made a huge difference with landlords. Love that.
Can I contribute? I'm sorry, I can't type right now.
Please, go
my name
for
is
it.
Christine. I'm the rental leasing coordinator for a Housing First housing authority that we serve about 50 people who are living with various disabilities. And I always try, regarding landlords, like so hard to cultivate the relationship. And one of the biggest things that I'm able to do in my current position that works super well is streamline the leasing process for these folks as much as possible and educate as much as possible, because so many of them have heard weird, untrue things about subsidized housing or subsidy in general. And they say things to me like, oh, I heard I can never evict a client. Oh, I heard I lose all my rights as a landlord. And like, or, oh, I heard it's tons of paperwork and you're going to be over here with a white glove looking at every single thing in my unit. And like, when I can say to them, no, it's not going to be like that. And no, it's not going to take 2 months for me to like approve this apartment and start issuing you payments. People say, I've never had such a good experience with a housing authority. If I had these experiences more often, I would rent to more subsidized clients. And so like, I try really hard to like make it like, you know, I don't like to say VIP experience, because like, listen, you know what? These people are holding something our clients need hostage to live. But if I give them a good experience, they're more likely to want to participate, even when things go wrong. So I just wanted to throw that in if it was helpful.
Hey, I think that's super helpful. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah, smoothing the process out and myth busting with landlords. And then I'll also add on this other piece that's been crucial for us related to that. When we can do some of that smoothing and myth breaking, they invite their friends. You know who landlords hang out with? Other landlords. Bring them all in. We need more people. So yeah, that's been a crucial intervention for us. I see Grace saying that they do have a maintenance department at Grace's workplace, and sometimes it works out well, and sometimes the landlords won't allow them to use their own maintenance folks. We experience that too, and so sometimes we do have to pony up some cash around maybe a landlord choosing to contract out some work, but it's greasing the wheels in that way has been critical too. Yeah, we deal with that too. But often when we can give folks a good experience, hey, we got a maintenance team to take care of this little small thing. And when a good experience happens, we're able to build on that for future maintenance work, especially in other units. Yeah, I'm seeing Trevor's question. Would like to hear more about these landlord events, having a hard time picturing what that looks like and the topics discussed. So COVID has dramatically altered this. We have shifted to a virtual way of doing this, but prior to that, we had as many as 50 people showing up to a landlord event where it's kind of like a meet and greet. Again, we'll cater it, get some food in there, give landlords a chance to shake hands of like our executives, make them feel special in that way. Do some brief, we don't want to like hold people hostage, but some brief training around things like subsidized housing rules, right? Around things like HUD inspections. Spend some time doing some of that myth breaking that Christine talked about, and then have plenty of time for Q&A, right? People to have an opportunity to like, okay, I got a person who's doing and saying this. What do I do? And then we can redirect some of that stuff to the clinical teams and bring some support to the conversation. So that's typically what those landlord events have looked like. We noticed that it was kind of a slow build, right? Not many people showed up to the first one. Few more people showed up to the next one. And so at its most, we've done like 3 to 4 in a year. That seems like a lot. And not always are folks willing to come to that many events a year, but we want to offer plenty of opportunity for people to come and engage in this way. So that's that. The last piece in terms of expectations for landlord, my last bullet point on the screen here is we can offer to those willing to hear this a chance for them to give back and contribute to ending homelessness. And that's the way we pitch it to them, right? Our agency has a mission to end homelessness, long-term homelessness especially. And so you get to contribute to that too. How exciting for you. And some people are touched by that. Some people are not, but we want to include this as part of our like range of pitches.
Could I jump in really quickly again on that?
Sure.
You can definitely, I've done that a lot where like one of my jobs, great example, I worked with veterans. Would you like to help a homeless veteran was one of the most successful lines I was ever able to utter as a housing advocate, because like so many people would react on the emotional level to that. So like, yeah, like if you can go with, even if it's not a veteran, like veteran is a little easier to market, but like if you could go with like, if you want to help this person that like is from your town maybe, or like if you can find some way for the landlord to relate to the tenant and create that connection, it can be super useful. Yeah.
Love that. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. You notice I'm not really talking about eviction yet, right? In this way, but I want to just like reiterate the importance of setting the right expectations and the pitch for landlords, because when we've cultivated a group of people that maybe feel like they're contributing to ending homelessness, that they know they have a team to rely on, to fall back on, that they know that repairs are going to get completed and rent is going to be paid on time, they're much more likely to work with us through these challenging tenancy issues. When people show up with too many people or there's too much foot traffic and all of these bullet points on the screen are in place, we're much more likely to sort of like work it out in the long term. So it's, what we're talking about is, eviction prevention. Angela kind of taking the words out of my mouth, right? It's like, what's the old phrase? An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of, I'm saying that wrong. Anyway, do all your work up front, and make your later life much easier down the road, right? Okay, in terms of providers, these are the expectations for us, right? Us as housing providers, us as case managers, us as a clinical team. We want to say that we have to treat this setup genuinely, that the unit belongs to the participant. Even in like a master lease, sublease setting, this is their home, right? And so we don't want to treat the participant as if their housing is conditional. The unit is their own. Just like in the unit that I rent, there may be some consequences for certain behaviors that break the lease or that break the law, right? But we're not going to sort of heap on our own consequences that treat the participant as if the housing is conditional based on meeting our program rules and expectations. And so we need to be really respectful also, right, of folks' time and space. And when we approach problems related to housing tenancy, we want to do that sensitively. We also have to know, just like for the landlords, this is hard work and it's not for the faint of heart. And some of these conversations really pull at us, tug at us, activate us. And so we sort of need to acknowledge that and be prepared for a little bit of risk, right? Housing first and harm reduction oriented work calls for you to not be super risk averse, right? Okay, the next one here, we'll try different strategies along the way, right? We'll throw one solution at a problem. It doesn't work. Let me try this other thing. That didn't work. Oh, well, this thing worked for that participant over there. Let me try it over here. And these things will not always work. But we learn from these experiences. And the program and the interventions that we roll out are going to be different for each individual. It's going to be really difficult to say, like, when you're faced with high foot traffic, do this. it might work, but you're going to need, yeah, as Herv mentions, a bag of tricks, couple of different things, many things to try, which requires our patience, our creativity, our flexibility. And we're going to have to do that in partnership with a team. If you're the only one on your team offering suggestions, eviction prevention strategies, you're going to run out of brain space and power to really really nip these issues in the bud. And so we have to do this in partnership with our colleagues and peers. And we're not always going to be successful there. I want to offer this last bullet point as one of the most important ones on this slide. Eviction and loss of housing is a pretty normal part of the process, especially when we think about the nature of this habilitative work rather than rehabilitative work. Learning the skills to maintain an independent set of independent housing is going to lead to loss of housing sometimes, right? Because it's a process and it's a big learning curve, as we've talked about. Here at Pathways, the numbers are around 20 to 30% of our folks lose their first apartment through a variety of reasons. And so we really need to normalize that. And when we think about, even thinking about like the stages of change, right? You've got pre-contemplation, contemplation, preparation, action, and kind of one of the final ones that you often see, exactly her saying, just like relapse is part of the recovery process, so too is eviction, and we need to normalize that. And what we found is when we use these evictions as a learning process and we have the space to rehouse people, we see that statistic drop in about half, right? So 10 to 15% of folks lose their second apartment, right? And so folks have learned. And we've supported people through the process. Great. I'm seeing Trevor say, getting a cause eviction changed to a no-fault eviction is part of the bag of tricks. Yeah, doing some advocacy around altering some of these evictions and the way they roll out can be pretty critical. I love that. Okay, let me pause here. What questions and comments are coming up for people? All right. Mutual termination instead of eviction is also a strategy. I'm loving that, Ezekiel. We do have, we'll talk about mutual agreements, but that's to maintain tenancy, not a mutual termination. But I will say that for us, many times our evictions are not formal evictions. Because we're master leasing and because we're able to kind of be this middle person, we'll work it out with the landlord where we say, all right, we're going to rehouse this person. Don't worry about it. We're going to get them out of there. And so nobody has to go to eviction court. Sometimes our participants will refuse to leave, and that has led to more formal eviction where we're the ones who are getting evicted. But we try and make that as smooth as possible as well, hopefully to cultivate and maintain that landlord relationship. Does your first eviction impact clients for a long time? Well, it doesn't impact their ability to get rehoused. We want to rehouse folks immediately, but it does have an impact on kind of their approach to housing, right? And so we want to kind of support people in very non-judgmental and non-stigmatizing ways. Reteaching basic skills. Not many clients have these skills. It's always a teaching process, and recovery and housing is a teaching process with the population we serve. I think you said it really well, that last bullet point, summing that up. Thanks for sharing that. All right, let me kick it over to Khalil to talk a little bit about kind of more specifics around preventing and responding to eviction, which I see that the group is really ready to like dive into. So that's great.
Alrighty, so we are in the home stretch. Actually, I'm not a sports person. I don't know if home stretch is what I meant to say, but we're going to talk about some common causes of complaint and or eviction. We'll probably breeze through this slide because we've already been talking about it pretty in depth. Some of the reasons our folks are terminated or leases are terminated or are typically on the radar of landlords, right? So we have noise disturbances, too much foot traffic, wanted guest or unwanted guest, right? Sometimes our folks are subleasing. This is one I haven't heard come up much on your end, so I'm wondering if this is true for you. But that I think can be looped into that idea of having guests that are wanted or unwanted. Sometimes we've found that one of the ways Pathways or other housing first agencies are actually helping somebody is providing us an income stream, right? We might provide this house for somebody, this home, and then they're actually subleasing it. Maybe they are out and about doing their own thing, staying elsewhere, and they might become their own landlords, right? Of this space and be renting that floor space. I've once seen a unit that was like super hostile style in South Philly, and I was like, whoa, this is a great idea. We can't be doing this, obviously, right? But there was like sheets and dividers and like mattresses in each. It was this person ended up having to be relocated because of this reason, right? So subleasing is definitely something we see also. Hoarding or other unsafe conditions. We know that our folks who have spent long periods of time not being able to hold on to belongings often come with some hoarding tendencies when we do end up housing them, right? Damages are a major concern. Odors and pests, as people kind of learn to live indoors and independently, is going to be an issue. Substance use behaviors are huge. It sounds like folks in this space are really familiar with this also. And one of the things we'll talk about, I think, throughout this training and pretty much the entirety of this training will be about really separating whether or not somebody's substance use is the reason that they are evicted or on the landlord's radar, or if it's the behaviors that happen as a result of those substance use behaviors, because we're finding that typically it is the latter. Right, it's not that this person is using, but what's happening as a result of their use, which might include those things like foot traffic, right, or unwanted guests or noise disturbances. Of course, we're going to have folks who don't want to pay rent, and complaints from other neighbors or the community. One of the things we've found tricky to do here is how do we navigate kind of mediating conflict between a Pathways participant and their neighbors while also maintaining confidentiality, right, in this person's treatment and recovery, and maybe not disclosing that, right? So a lot of times this is going to look like interfacing with the landlord to address the issue, or interfacing with our client, our participant, to talk about just some people skills and relationship skills to engage with their neighbors when these things do come up. I also will be very transparent and say that sometimes this looks like asking a participant to not engage with a neighbor if they don't currently harness those skills to do that in a way that is safe or effective. We once had a participant told to contact the landlord directly because her water had been off and her heat was off. It was definitely a landlord issue, but this was not a participant that we wanted to be engaging with the landlord at the moment, because of her presentation and because of her frustration and really wanting to preserve that relationship. So again, this is going to be on a case-by-case basis, I think, kind of the way we're navigating services and avoiding a potential eviction. Are there anything that we're seeing here that we're finding most common that anyone wants to like shout out or talk about a little more in depth, maybe some creative ways you've navigated these situations, or you want some input on our end about ways we've navigated these specific items? Feel free to go ahead and drop those in the chat, or also feel free to interrupt me. I will say that when it comes to abandonment, something we found the most effective is outreach, right? Hitting the streets, physically looking for somebody in locations that they are known to be in, and supporting them back to their unit, right? Because our goal is to maintain their housing. I don't think it's of the utmost importance that they are staying here currently. We know that those are challenges when moving somebody initially. It might be hard to keep them in their unit at first, right? We're going to hang on to the hope and the belief that they can and will adjust to being housed, and that this unit is for them. So for the sake of keeping them housed, it might be finding them on the street and taking them right back to their unit for that home visit. If they want to be supported back to the community, we also have the resources to do that. Hansel, I see your hand up. What's up?
Yeah, no, I just wanted to talk a little bit about that, like unwanted guests. Like when you have a client, I have a client that just got housed, and he's been, in the streets since like 2009. So those are the conversations that we had, don't let anybody unwanted into your home. When you weren't housed, nobody was there for you. So you don't want to bring people over because you don't want to get evicted. You work so hard to get your Section 8. You don't want to lose it now. And those are things that, he's been kind of listening to, and he's had a hard time before. But he does call me and he does say, hey, somebody does want to come over. And I'm like, well, what do you think? Are they going to offer you something good if they come over, or is it going to be out of something that could be beneficial to you, or is it a good relationship for you to bring over? Because, he did say that they were drinking. So then when we talked about the drinking, you've been sober 2 months. So do you think this is good? And then eventually he made his decision, and he made a good decision. He decided to bring this person to a meeting. So those are kind of things, like basic skills we try to teach them so they can keep their housing.
Yeah, I really love actually that you shared this, and I think really applies to some things we're going to talk about later in training. But one of the things I'm hearing is you are asking this person questions in a way that is not accusatory, right? It's not judgmental. You really are navigating this with this part. Is this a good idea, right? And that's exactly the way we want to go about it, in a way that is empowering and allows this participant to make choice. There might be some natural consequences that come with a choice that isn't going to benefit this participant, right? It's not about the consequences we are handing down and letting them know, but as long as they are aware and know, like, hey, here are some potential choices. What do you feel like is best for you? I really do feel like that is our due diligence, and that is enough, right? We should be emphasizing and empowering our participants to exercise autonomy while they're adjusting to living on their own. And it sounds like that work and navigating it the way that you have has been helpful for this participant who might have previously been struggling, and it is now asking more questions like, hey, by the way, this thing is going to happen. I want your feedback. It's awesome that this participant is reaching out and asking that, right? That might not be something that they were doing previously, but because you're bringing it back to their goal, their own personal, individual, and identified goal of wanting to maintain their housing and not be evicted, they're able to be like, okay, maybe I do want to preserve my housing situation, right? And go about the situation a little differently. I appreciate you sharing that. Thanks a ton.
I wanted to throw in too about the guests, because we had in my program, I had a woman in in a unit in the community, and her electricity got shut off, and she doesn't want to use our agency's utility forgiveness funds because her sister ran up the bill, and she's just out for this pound of flesh from her sister. We've been trying to work with her on this for 2 years, but you know what? Hey, so you know what she did? She had someone move in the unit with her and turn on the electric in their name. But you know something, in the end, kept her from getting evicted because the power was on. So
I love that.
it's yeah. You know what? Like, was it a perfect solution? No, but we met the client where she was at. She's still in the unit and she has electricity. So it's like, like you gotta look at like the outcome, and like, yeah, it was a truly individualized approach. Like, I wouldn't have been like, hey, why don't you just have someone move in, and like, they're not on the lease and they're not on the voucher, but like, in order for my client to have what she needed and stay housed, like, sometimes it's like, it's interesting the steps that you have to take, or like the solutions that come into play.
Yeah, a high level of creativity sometimes, and sometimes that will come from the participant themselves, right? They'll find a way. And I think we have to like not be, I say this cautiously.
They're very smart because they're trying to survive. Our clients are a lot smarter than we realize sometimes.
Absolutely. And I will also say, I think we have to be not too afraid of things that break our rules, or that maybe break the law a little bit, or just like ways of staying under the landlord's radar. We view those very specifically as harm reduction strategies, of like keeping off the landlord's radar, and finding ways to avoid eviction. And remember, that person having electricity and like enough to eat and a shelter over their head is more important then following the rules. That's why we're doing this work in the first place, right? I want to queue up Khalil to talk a little bit about this one. Chris Hatch's comments. I feel as though sometimes neighbor complaints are not handled in fair manners due to stigma around the people we serve. Do you have tips to making sure landlords weigh neighbor complaints fairly and that our clients can tell their side of the story? How do we make sure that like the stigma is not leaking over and causing undue burden on our participants?
Yeah, I think that this is hard. I did see in the chat earlier in the presentation, folks asking about what do these landlord events look like, right? And Ryan kind of dived into that a little bit. But I think this really does look like some education and conversation discussion with landlords who are willing to hear it. And then I also think a very raw and real discussion with landlords sometimes is necessary. And I do have an example. I was part of housing a participant who did have an active substance use addiction, substance use disorder. And we got a complaint from the landlord that this participant is having a lot of foot traffic in all hours of the night. They have it on video, all of these things. And we asked the landlord, like, is this like a noise disturbance? And the landlord said, no, this isn't a noise disturbance. It's not loud. People are just coming often. And we said, okay, like, is he disrupting any of his neighbors? The landlord said, no, I just saw it on the camera. I said, okay, like, feel free to send us this footage of our participants, like foot traffic and what's going on there. He sent us that footage. And we framed it in a way, like, we'd also love to talk about this with the participant, right? We were asking for ourselves. We want to see what the participant's doing because we have a feeling something funky is going on here, right? We can kind of smell and sniff out this stigma piece here, right? They know our participant might be using substances, so we don't want people going into this unit, right? So the landlord did send us back some footage of 2 people entering our participant's unit a little bit after midnight. And then we left it to our housing director to have the rest of that conversation, because all of us can have guests after midnight if we so choose to, right? Not all of us are awake, but our participant was. There's not any evidence of like substance use going on in this unit or outside of this unit. Our participant just had visitors at a time that was like, there was no noise disturbance that was confirmed by the landlord and the neighbors. And yeah, this just had to be something that we flushed out and had a very real and honest conversation with the landlord about, like, okay, this doesn't seem to actually be causing anybody distress, right? There's no damage to the unit. Everybody is safe and okay. Our participant had a late night guest, and that is okay. Like, this is their unit. This person isn't living there, right? So it is definitely difficult. I don't think there's any one magic thing we can do to kind of eliminate the stigma, and this is going to be an ongoing conversation for a long time. So I think that relationship with the landlord is going to be important to foster and to continue working on also. But yeah, and I just saw briefly in the chat, someone wrote about tenant rights. This is something that recently we've printed for our participants, and for ourselves to know, and for the clinical teams to know, that when folks are having specific issues with their unit, it is the responsibility of the landlord to be responding in a way that is appropriate, timely, and effective, especially when it comes to things like heat and electricity, right? So they want to hold our participants accountable. We also want to hold them accountable and making sure that our folks are treated fairly, right? There's no reason our participant couldn't have guests after midnight, and that's something that we needed to tease out of the landlord and not just tell him. So I don't want to say that one of the ways we eliminate stigma or make sure our participants treated fairly is to like kiss a landlord's butt, but sometimes it is, and that keeps our folks housed.
Great. I want to move us along, but I just want to respond to one more comment from Monica. For abandonment, do you have a time limit for holding the unit for the tenant? Also, what do you do in cases where a tenant will be incarcerated for an unknown amount of time? I do want to say this is a very specific program level conversation and set of rules. We do have, I think it's a 90-day policy, but we're doing a ton of work in terms of outreach to sort of find folks. Sometimes we have had to discharge folks. In terms of incarceration, we're doing everything we can to get people back home, even if briefly. to keep them in that unit. But there are times where we've had to discharge people from housing, but maintain service provision and then rehouse them once they come back from incarceration. So that's typically how we handle some of that.
Awesome. So now we're going to move on to accountability without termination. I said in the last slide, we're going to breeze through this, and we didn't. This one we actually will breeze through because there's a slide on natural consequences that I think also really brings loops in this conversation. But real quickly, we're housing folks with the knowledge that they're likely going to have to be relocated. So we write that into our program, right? We want to have vacant units that we are master leasing that we can relocate somebody to if a landlord's like, no, absolutely not, move this person out. We want to save face, we want to preserve this relationship and have this unit for somebody else. We're going to house them knowing that in learning these activities of daily living, some for the first time, some all over again, we might have to relocate them. And if that's not an option, we want to offer them shelter resources. We do know that our folks experiencing homelessness are very resistant to shelter. We want to make sure that this is something that they are aware of and have access to in the meantime. Staff is still supportive with the relocation and are a part of that process every step of the way. An ongoing clinical conversation to prevent this from happening again is going to be really important. And there's also a slide section that talks about what this looks like to put into practice and action. Some agencies use the term called corrective action plan, right? Or a mutual agreement to maintain housing. But this is basically going to be, after housing not working for you, here's our plan to keep you housed based on what you feel like you can do in your own strengths and abilities. Housing first, in a operating way that is aligned with the high fidelity measure, doesn't put a number on the amount of time somebody can be evicted. But folks do need to know that yes, you need to be relocated, or yes, you'll have a shelter stay. And although we can keep housing you and can house you later in the future, there's some folks unhoused right now that might take precedence in being moved into a unit before you, right? And I want to really point out that all of these things are pretty natural consequences to the behaviors that participants are engaging in or have led up to their eviction. So I really want to emphasize here that they don't need additional program consequences, right? They don't need to be removed from our program because of these things. They don't need to go into treatment or pursue recovery because of these things, right? These are all natural consequences that folks are already going to be experiencing without the needed additional kind of program consequences here. Okay, I think we're going to move on to a break briefly. Go for it, Ryan.
Yeah, let's take a quick break. We wanted to take one at the top of the hour, but felt like we were kind of right in the thick of things. So let's take five quick minutes, and then we'll close out with our final 40 minutes or so of content. Thanks for your patience, folks. We'll see you at, let's say, 22 past the hour.
Alrighty, so we are going to dive right in with some pretty common what if questions. Okay. So what if somebody's just never home for a home visit, right? What are some of the things that we're doing? I'm going to go through these and loop in a strategy in the end. Sometimes a participant might only let us in certain rooms, right? What are they hiding? Participants are very consistently locked out, right? What are the strategies we're using to make sure that, one, they have access to their home, because you don't want them to be experiencing homelessness if they don't need to anymore, right? Because they have access to a home. What if someone just is consistently causing significant damage and disturbances to their unit? What if they have a maintenance concern? We are able to fix it, but they won't let maintenance in. These are all things that I really do believe can be fixed and repaired with a relationship, right? And building a relationship. None of these things are reasons that we need to be terminating somebody from services, right? Or evicting them, right? These are all kind of very real life things. Our folks could be out and about regularly, right? And have some kind of behaviors that are falling into this being housed stage, right? That some might not go away, right? Some folks might just love to be out in the community, and I really do think that that is a strength and probably should be embraced and encouraged, right? With new electronic door locks, yeah, there are so many different ways we can kind of combat this idea of participants losing keys. The staff here at Pathways, some folks on the clinical teams know how to make keys. We have a key machine here, and we do have some extras for participants when they are locked out. And sometimes we have lock boxes for folks outside of their units also, where we know keys are going to be in there. Now, the way we set it up is all these lockboxes have the same code, so participants aren't given this code directly. But we do have on-call support 24/7 on a rotating basis, right? So somebody is going to be able to respond and give this person access to that lockbox if that's something that's necessary. But none of these things are reasons that people need to be terminated from the program. And I want to emphasize that point, I think, specifically. These are all things that can be remedied, I think, with building a relationship, right? There's a lot of shame and guilt that comes with like substance use, right? So someone is consistently just peeking through the door and that is the extent of your home visit. Maybe the idea and reiterating program expectations and guidelines. And sometimes it looks like saying, hey, there are no program expectations and guidelines for what you do in your unit, right? Can be super helpful. Right. It makes sense for folks to be guarded against current substance use behaviors because we know how they've been treated by other agencies and organizations around their substance use behaviors, right? So kind of normalizing this, maybe not normalizing it, but approaching this in a way that is just neutral, right? We're not saying, yeah, you're using, or we're not saying, oh, you're terrible because you're using, but we're saying like, you can let us know. In fact, we want you to let us know so that we can make sure we're providing additional services if you do need them, right? Do you need support to the local storage exchange, right? Do you have sharps containers, right? Is that why you don't want me to come to your unit? Do you have sharps on the floor? Do you need somewhere to put them? I want to support you in navigating this space safely. And that's not going to come in a day. That's going to definitely come over time and after a relationship is established. And I think also comes from those initial interactions, right? What is somebody's understanding of your program during those first few encounters? This is something we need to be emphasizing pretty early on, right? Hey, there are no consequences for you using in your unit, but we want to make sure that if you're doing this, that you're doing it safely. So what can we do to support you? Ways we can move through some of these what ifs. Cool. Move on to some communication and confronting problems. I think a lot of times we think that these things need to exist in secret, or we can only be talking about them with our teams or with our supervisors. But I think there's a lot of value in addressing an issue straight on, head on with a participant, right? Naming what this is, how they might foresee navigating this in a way that is solution oriented, right? Because chances are they know that there's an issue too. I don't think our participants are as unaware as we make them seem sometimes, and they might have some feedback in navigating this and reducing the recurrence of whatever issue is leading to this eviction or housing concern in general, if we just ask them and talk to them about it. Like, hey, your bathtub's consistently overflowing on a weekly basis, that's leaking into the unit downstairs. What are we going to do about this, right? And we've talked about this a lot. We do want to avoid shame. There's already shame kind of associated with the idea of being homeless, right? Of having a severe mental illness, of using substances, right? This is something we want to be talking about with folks and making sure that they are comfortable talking to us about also. We want to provide information verbally and in writing. And we want to talk about priorities for bringing the unit into compliance, right? This again goes back to naming these issues very kind of outwardly with a participant. Hey, here's what we're seeing in the unit, and we really want to support you in your goal to maintain being housed. So there needs to be some follow-up steps. But also you don't have to do this on your own. I am here to support you with this, right? Yeah, so applying harm reduction skills and trauma-informed care to housing challenges, I think, is going to be our first line of defense, right? Our interactions with the participant are going to be kind of the first sort of interventions that we're using to prevent eviction and housing concerns. And then I also think when we do use a harm reduction model and we're housing people like that, and it's really low barrier, we do rely on these natural consequences a lot. So folks sometimes I think, okay, I actually don't have to clean my unit, right? Well, one, cleanliness isn't, I shouldn't have used that as an example. That's not a requirement to be housed, right, by our programs. But maybe there are some like hoarding tendencies or noise disturbances or traffic concerns, right? Sometimes putting a deadline on something really does get folks moving. And I think all folks need to know is that they're in 30 days, this thing is going to happen, right? They don't need to know what it is, but letting them know, hey, you have 30 days to kind of address this issue. We are here to support you in addressing this issue. What can we do? Might put some might contribute to some urgency there, right? And this isn't threatening eviction. This is just saying, hey, in this amount of time, we want to see this thing happen, and we're here to help you do that. So when we're thrown a curveball, I love to talk about clarifying role and purpose with participants, right? That's clear and purpose. That's role and purpose of our specific job and relationship with the participant, right? As the case manager, as the therapist, or whatever your role may be, and also as the agency, right? Our goal is to keep you housed, right? We would love to keep you housed. We know you want to be housed. That's how you came into services, right? That's how you arrived at our door, right? And here are some of the things that aren't going so well, and what we need to do to keep you housed. Just outlining that pretty straightforward is going to be important. Asking open-ended questions is going to be important also, right? This helps us keep away from language that is judgmental, right? And making assumptions, and really lets participants navigate services and specific housing situations. We also want to mirror language used by the resident, right? We don't need to use big terms. We don't need to use big words and maybe over-explain something. Chances are participants are aware of the situation going on, especially if we've explained it to them already. And we do need to expect the engagement and motivation of participants to fluctuate, right? Sometimes folks are going to feel really motivated to do something. Other times they're not. This isn't much different than our own motivation, right? As helping professionals or people doing this work in the field. This happens to us, so we should expect it to be going on with our participants also. And of course, we want to be drawing out that positive change and emphasizing when we are noticing strength with somebody, right? If somebody has hoarding tendencies, but we can get through the door this time, that should be celebrated, right? And can lead to that increased motivation for a participant. Somebody dropped in chat motivational interviewing techniques. That is in the notes to include on this slide, right? We do want to be pulling out as much trauma-informed care and motivational interviewing as we can with folks to really make sure that they know that we are aligning ourselves with them, right? This isn't me and you against each other, right? I'm not dangling housing over your head. I want to work with you and support you in keeping you housed is the message we want to be sending to somebody. So motivational interviewing here is going to be super important and crucial to one, maintaining that relationship, and then also maybe kind of decreasing some of those behaviors that might be creeping toward an eviction.
Can I also say here that, I think we want to jump right into problem solving mode sometimes with this. Well, I have this solution that worked with somebody else. I'm going to try this with them. And I think what Khalil was really sharing on this and in talking about motivational interviewing and all of these things is like, slow down and ask questions, like engage the participant. We've got this challenge around your housing tendency. And I know you've got this goal. Let's ask some open-ended, respectful, non-judgmental questions to get you talking and brainstorming. How are we going to solve this, right? It's your house, it's your place, it's your unit. And so kind of slowing down and really doing the relationship building work can be pretty crucial. I want to talk more about harm reduction now. We've brought up harm reduction a number of times already so far. And of course, as a group, many of us have participated together in the harm reduction intensive series. So I won't spend too long here, but I'll kind of just reiterate this harm reduction principles slide. And these are the principles that we usually hang our hats on for harm reduction. You'll notice that if you're unfamiliar with these, that these are different from what like the National Harm Reduction Coalition puts on their website for harm reduction principles, because those ones are very drug user specific and intentionally so and importantly so. because we're talking about housing as a harm reduction intervention, it feels important to expand or to have a set of principles that are less drug specific. There are other things that are going to put tenancy at risk than drugs. And so these are the principles where when we don't know what to do, or when we're not sure our intervention is really meeting the needs in the right ways, this framework can really guide our work, right? So health and dignity, participant center, participant involvement, participant self-rule. Those last three really are focused on like choice and self-determination. There's an equity piece that's necessary here too, kind of recognizing the inequalities and injustices that people face through their various identities that they navigate the world through. And then practical and realistic is one of my favorite ones on this list. Thinking about the ways that like one strategy of maintaining tenancy will work for one person, but that's not going to be practical for another person with their various strengths and needs. And so really kind of honing in on what's actually practical and realistic for this person in this moment. I think the example earlier around like the subleasing and putting the electric in somebody else's name, I don't know that I would have been able to come up with that strategy, or the program would have, but they came up with it because it was practical and it was realistic for them, right? And so that really meets that principle in my mind. And then Khalil talked about the accountability without termination piece, right? We're not firing people from care for simply not meeting their goals or for having a recurrence of some behavior, right? And so what is harm reduction in a housing context? The program, we put forward this idea that providing a person with housing creates a foundation on which the process of recovery can begin, right? So having a place that one can call their own in and of itself can serve as a motivator for folks to change their relationship with given behavior that they have, right? At its core, we know the value and dignity of having a place of our own, and we don't want to threaten that, right? And so we need to bring that into the conversation with people. And we also need to allow room for folks to make choices, to use alcohol or not, to take medication or not, to continue hoarding or not. And so we'll have to recognize that just like with the way we traditionally view substance use as like there are stages of change or stages of relationship with substances, we can recognize that folks can be at different stages of change with a variety of behaviors, right? Thinking about behavior in a broader way, and not always thinking about behaviors. The one that I keep using in this training today is like foot traffic. Not always thinking about foot traffic in this like all or nothing binary, right? That there is a spectrum of difference there, a continuum of use, if you will, related to behaviors as well. And so recognizing that, acknowledging it, and responding to it as such is really a critical part of this. We're going to have to tailor our interventions to the specific stage of change folks are in. They're having 12 people a night show up late at night. That may be a more chaotic relationship to that behavior than other folks who are having one or two people show up, or one person consistently every night, right? And so our intervention will necessarily look different for those folks. Along the way, we can continue to offer education, thinking about like offering tenants' rights information to folks, as well as support in changing relationships. Maybe folks are feeling like they can't alter the patterns of foot traffic because people have come to rely on them as a safe place to come and hang out late at nights, right? And so maybe we can have conversations around boundary setting. Maybe we can have conversations around approaching a relationship with folks. We're coaching in some ways around some of these issues, and that's a skill building that is necessary. And that once again, folks are able to make choices on their own and should be allowed to, and that we should be respecting those choices and not threatening people's housing status on our own separately from potential natural consequences that could occur through the landlord. Yeah. We talked about natural consequences quite a bit. I'm going to kick it over to Khalil to kind of like tie that in a bow for us.
Awesome. So it's important to know that participants are still accountable to the consequences of their actions, right? Our folks are not, you don't experience homelessness, right, without experiencing some of these natural consequences. And I think that's just important to know also. We're like, these folks think they can do whatever they want. No, that's a red flag in the helping profession. When we hear that, our folks are very resourceful and creative because they've had to be, and are maybe in the process of unlearning some survival oriented skills that they needed to use before they were housed. One of the things we want to ask ourselves, if we are kind of moving through this accountability or consequence phase, is somebody actually posing a threat or a continued disturbance to themselves or to their neighbors? Right? Because if they are, there might be some natural consequences there. If somebody violates probation, that's not a case management team's decision or follow-up to make, right? We can support folks in reaching out and connecting to their probation or parole officers. If they don't or refuse to do that, there are some very natural real-life consequences that are going to follow and accompany that, right? They don't need to hear, they don't need to be handed down a consequence from the program if they're already going to be incarcerated. To me, incarceration sounds like consequence enough. Yes, living in a different world. And absolutely, Christine, piggybacking off that idea of just natural consequences and homelessness and substance use coming, just being accompanied by just so many consequences of their own. When folks don't pay bills or don't pay rent, utilities get shut off and people get evicted, right? We want to avoid this at all costs, but this is a natural consequence. Now, we're not threatening program termination here, and we'll work to rehouse somebody, right? But if they're going to move through this eviction process without the support of the program, we might have to offer them shelter supports before we can house them again, because some other folks are in line to be housed before them. It's a very natural consequence here. Yes, participants should be offered support, but our goal is to like keep bad things from continuing to happen to them, right? Our job is to provide this choice, right? As many choices as possible, and letting things play out as they do and as they will. We want to prevent as much as possible from happening and offer that support when we can. But chances are the decisions that our folks make will come back and circle back and impact them in some form or another.
So thinking about harm reduction specifically in the home, remembering our goal, right? Our goal in a housing first model is to keep people safe in their homes. And so housing itself is a form of harm reduction. By providing a space for people to be in, by connecting people to that space, we're keeping people safer and healthier than they would be living on the street, right? Without altering any other behaviors, right? And so the intention is always to keep people in their homes. That's our end goal. If I were to make a harm reduction analogy, the end goal of providing syringes is to avoid community spread of disease, right? Of HIV, of Hep C, etc. And so the intention of providing housing is to keep people off the streets, to keep people from becoming homeless. And so what we need to do is we focus on the specific behaviors or patterns through things like low profile coaching for housing retention. What I mean by that is, like, again, staying off the landlord's radar. So for example, if a landlord is receiving a kind of ongoing and continuous complaints from neighbors about a participant who's partying with their friends until the wee hours of the morning on a weeknight, we might be able to suggest that the participant move the party to another location. Hey, maybe not every night do we party here. Could you party at your friend's house some nights? Or maybe we could consider asking them to kind of set some boundaries on how long they go. Maybe turn down the music by 10 p.m., but that doesn't mean you need to change anything else about the party, right? Or perhaps they can wait to invite their friends over until Saturday night instead of Thursday night. Would be less likely to receive the ire of the landlord in that case, right? And so thinking about risk set and setting, which is a concept that we talked about in the harm reduction intensive series, we can alter the risk, we can alter the set, and we can alter the setting, the mindset or the actual environment through which these behaviors are taking place. Doesn't mean we're thinking about like all or nothing. It's not stop partying or you're going to get evicted. It's what if we move this knob, What if we tweak this knob, right? Frequency, intensity, or duration is what I see Christine writing in the chat. Absolutely. There's a lot of different ways we can have conversation. Some of these things may be more practical and realistic depending on what's going on with that particular person. Sometimes those complaints may come up only on the first or second of the month. Interesting. So perhaps the disruption that's happening is really linked to the participants' receipt of their SSI benefits. And so then the team could then plan to hold on to a portion of that income. So there's less of a chance the funds will be spent on, alcohol or party drugs that could lead to this disruptive noise. And so this is the way we can kind of set up systems to reduce risk, right? Our systems that we put in place, again, systematic approach to addressing this issue. They're still going to get all their money, but we're going to maybe distribute it in a more even way throughout the month. And we'll maybe reduce the risk that they're going to kind of go all out on that first or second of the month. We can also provide supportive monitoring for safety maintenance. We can encourage kind of ongoing, open and honest discussions about substance use with our participants, which will help us kind of monitor for safety risks, right? If we're talking more about what you're doing and how you're spending your time and what risks you're engaging in, we can kind of monitor that a little bit in a supportive and non-judgmental way. And so we can always be checking in on their supply of Narcan, for example. Yeah. We'll also say that these conversations often have a level of urgency to them because there's this immediate threat to eviction. And unfortunately, changes to behaviors or ways of low profile coaching or keeping people off the radar of the landlord is not going to happen overnight. We've talked on and on and on today about the way that these skills are developed over time and that it's habilitative. And so 100% elimination of a behavior might not be possible right away. And so what strides can be made to work toward their goal of maintaining housing in the interim? And so, we often hear that common lingo around meet somebody where they're at. And then we like to add, but don't leave them there, right? And so it's our job to help folks identify maybe some small behaviors, but that might not be serving them towards their ultimate goal. And then we can help them kind of using a motivational interviewing approach, help them align their behavior with their goals. Again, sometimes in small ways, not all or nothing type conversations always. And then remembering that we have different ideas about what looks like a beautiful house. And so what we're striving for in Housing First is a functional house, one that is safe, things that are working the way they should. And we have to really be careful about not centering our values or our expectations of what a home should look like. Those things may not be the concerns that our participants have. All right, we're going to dive in. Khalil's going to help us dive into this really key strategy that we use pretty regularly called mutual agreements. So I'll leave you to it.
Thanks, Ryan. So in other agencies, maybe yours, a mutual agreement is going to be something that we're using to follow up with somebody to make an agreement, come up with a plan after Housing First isn't working, right? After our program isn't working for somebody, and they might be in jeopardy of being terminated from the program, or potentially evicted, right? So some of the other language used to talk about these things might be a corrective action plan, right? This is happening as a result of something that happened. So what I want to emphasize there is that needing to go over this with somebody is not a failure of Housing First, right? And is not a failure of harm reduction. This is something that we're doing as a result of a behavior or as a result of a challenge after maybe this harm reduction approach in Housing First wasn't working out for somebody the way it was originally intended, right? This typically comes when somebody was in harm's way or has put somebody else in harm's way, or we're trying really hard to keep somebody housed, but eviction is kind of getting closer and closer. So the core components of these agreements are going to be I think I skipped the slide, I'm sorry. Are going to be reiterating these lease or use and occupancy expectations, right? This goes back to this idea and this skill of clarifying role and purpose. I think sometimes when we're bringing clients in, it's so easy to here sign this thing. This is like a rental agreement, right? This is your use and occupancy agreement, and we're not really reviewing this with somebody. I think another way we can be really preventative with this and making sure folks are aware of this is maybe our agencies are hosting sessions or onboarding sessions for folks that we're going to be housing soon, right? And we're going over this together so that folks know what they're getting into and can make a decision about whether or not they want to be part of this or they do or they don't. We want to note violations or areas of concern, right? We want to be detailing these out completely and as they are, and we'll talk about some ways we can do this in the next slide. We want to talk about maybe eviction being on the table if the participant doesn't make these adjustments, right? And that's not always something that's in our agency's control, right? We're working with landlords, this is their property, and eviction might not be preventable if these behaviors and these actions continue to occur. We make sure that folks are aware of that also. But we also want to make sure that folks know that there are ways we can support them, and we want to be in the loop. We want to be knowing what we can do so that there are less holes in your wall, right? What can we be doing? What supports can we be connecting you to that you may not have currently? And I will also say, although Housing First does not mandate things like mental health treatment or substance use treatment, sometimes this is where we're looping in some of those things, right? Because the program's not working, they're at threat of eviction, or they've hurt somebody, or they've hurt themselves, right? So this is where we can come in and say, hey, the program's not really working the way it was intended to for you. What does it look like to require you to meet with the therapist once a month for the next 3 months, right? This is where we can loop in and kind of mandate that support if the goal is to keep them housed. And I think when we're looping in the client's goals, they typically are pretty agreeable to something like this if the end result is them being able to maintain their housing. We want our goals to be specific, measurable, these things, SMART goals. Folks are familiar with SMART goals, right? We want to have target dates here and make sure that these are realistic, right? And that these are obtainable for folks. One of the things I've seen, and I think helping professionals are seeing now, is that instances of intimate partner violence are increasingly tricky to navigate, right? It might not be super fair to require somebody to no longer have access to this partner or abusive partner anymore if that person is going to find them anyway, right? We know that this isn't something that's always in somebody's control. So what I want to say here is that we need to be creative with navigating this and what we are asking somebody to do and making sure that what we're asking them to do is within their control. And it's the mutual piece here, right? This is a mutual agreement. It's going to be important that staff are in the loop on this and the participants are both agreeing that these are the things that we need to see moving forward. So one of the tools we can use is a tool called ACEs that outlines some of the language we want to be including in creating these mutual agreements, right? So we want to use action words when we're talking to somebody. This, yes, for paper and for the actual agreement, but also when we're talking to somebody, right? We want to be asking somebody to tell me about the holes in your walls, right? Not, oh my God, Joey, there's holes in your walls this week, right? We don't want to imply judgment or that this person did it or is wrong for doing it, but we want to build a relationship and let them know that we're here to hear what happened, right? Because we have services and supports that we can be offering them if they're letting us in, right? Or somebody's locks are just consistently not working and we're accusing them of changing their locks, right? Maybe we're just asking them that, hey, show me how your lock is sticking when you lock the door behind you, right? We're not jumping to conclusions and saying, hey, you're locking your doors, why can't we get in, right? We want to use curious questioning when we can, right? I wonder if this alternative method might work, right? Or I wonder if you can let us know when a home visit is going to work for you, right? Help me understand why your bathtub keeps overflowing, right? This might have nothing to do with the participant at all, but if we can are let in by that participant to kind of talk through this issue, we could maybe mitigate this issue and touch base with the landlord or a plumber if we need to, if it's a general plumbing concern, right? We want to be as empathetic as possible always, right? We want to be reflecting back feelings. It sounds like you are feeling overwhelmed, right? Or I can understand why you'd be upset by this or why you're angry. And then also statements of concern. I find that these are really helpful when we've already built a rapport with somebody. If we're letting a participant know that we're worried or concerned about their housing situation, chances are after we build a relationship, they're going to have that same worry and concern. And that's where the worry and concern really needs to be, right? Because they are the people in control of kind of making those adjustments and preserving their housing. Okay, so here are some examples of mutual agreements. I'm going to emphasize probably the second and third bullets, because those are typically things that might lead to an eviction, right? And we are preserving somebody's housing by addressing these things, right? So an example of a mutual agreement for somebody who is maybe a consistent noise disturbant might look like this. I'll limit my guests in my apartment to 2 at a time and turn the music off by 7 p.m. on the weeknights and 9 p.m. on the weekend. Right? This is very specific. This is posted somewhere where the participant has access to and can reference for the sake of preserving their housing, right? The second one says, I will schedule bi-weekly trips to the laundromat with my team for support with washing my clothes, right? This is what the participant can be doing to mitigate this issue, and this is what staff can be doing to help support them. These are very specific, time-oriented. And I want to emphasize that we should be consistently tying this back to participants' specific goals to maintain housing. And I do believe if they are receiving help and support from a housing agency, that remaining housed likely is one of their goals.
All right, I don't think we have time to go through practice today, so I want to kind of bring us through some final thoughts before we wrap up. I'll say that when we send out these slides, we had the idea that maybe we could send you in breakout rooms and discuss some like common eviction challenges, and as a group come up with some SMART goals around mutual agreements. So let me just go back 1 second to this mutual agreement slide and note the way that these are representative of SMART goals. Maybe they could even be improved, but the simplicity of these agreements, right? It's not a lot, and it's not simply because we as a program would like people to wash their clothes in different ways. Like there's something that's happening that's threatening their tenancy, and we will come together to brainstorm ways, and then we can provide some of the concrete language and timelines and specific and measurable components of it to have an agreement that really makes sense for everybody. So some final thoughts here as we start to wrap up. Eviction really should be treated as a last resort. We, as a housing first program or as a housing program, however your organization operates, we're ultimately trying to avoid people living on the streets. That's what we want. We want people to have shelter over their heads. And so eviction should be the final straw, which means we'll do anything we can to support tenancy in every way possible. We tried to emphasize today how much of this work happens before we ever get into a sticky situation with somebody, right? It's proactive and it's ongoing and continuous communication, both with the landlord, inter-team, as well as with the participant. That's really crucial. I know it feels cliche to say that, but the communication and the relationship part of this is what saves people from arriving back on the streets in so many cases that we've seen. Every participant's needs are different. And so the work is going to be really individualized. What worked for one person may not work for another. And it may lead us to have, as a team, to require quite a bit of like creative problem solving, stuff that we've never tried before. Let's throw everything at the wall, because remember, so what if this intervention fails if the next one that we try is going to avoid somebody arriving back on the streets, right? That is like the ultimate harm that we want to prevent. And then we really want to make sure we're incorporating choice into everything, even in the corrective action plans, the mutual agreements to maintain tenancy. Really critical to incorporate choice there, choice in terms of brainstorming solutions, choice in terms of whether maybe it's time to move on and relocate. It should be included as well. And then in terms of like the normalization of this process, or the viewing these processes without judgment, eviction can and should be regarded as a learning experience. Hopefully we have the resources and availability to rehouse people, because we don't want, we want to kind of really respond with accountability without termination. But we should be looking back on these events and partnering with participants to avoid future problems. Yeah. So we've reached the end of our content. I'll put the Q&A slide up now. Feel free to throw some questions in the chat or raise a hand on Zoom. I do see Lois's question. Are there info sessions or groups offered to individuals while they're in the housing phase to help offset some of these behaviors? Well, in our setting, we're not doing it as info sessions with our participants. Our work happens in community in a mobile way, most frequently in the home, right? We do home visits at least once every 2 weeks, but often much more frequently, especially when there are challenges coming up. And so the support and the education is typically happening on an individual basis as opposed to groups, at least in our setting. And it's happening very regularly during intense and stressful moments. I hope that answers your question. That's what our setting looks like. I know many settings could look different. Valiant, I see your hand raised, please.
Good afternoon, all. Good morning, all. I would like to ask, is there any specific punishment, or do we really evict people who continuously behave rational or does not cooperate during their stay in our housing? What is the punishment? How does it play out?
Yeah, thanks for this question. I think specifically and strongly we would suggest not implementing punishments. We don't really think that punishment does anything other than layer on additional stigma and shame onto the kind of challenges that people already are knowing about and facing. The punishment, if you were to call it that, or the accountability and consequence process is pretty clear that it is it's eviction, which is uncomfortable. People are going to have to leave the place that they've made their own. And so that ends up being a consequence on its own. We don't have to add on additional layers of punishment. I see Monica's question. Are you able to share your occupancy agreements and mutual agreement templates? We can share our mutual agreement template. We're going to include that as a tip sheet. Our occupancy agreement is actually just something that mirrors the rental agreement itself. We don't want to add any additional provisions into our use and occupancy agreement. So it's a sublease setup, but it is just the it's just almost like a one-to-one of the actual rental agreement. Cynthia, I see your hand raised, please.
Well, my question was, I actually put it in the chat before because we were talking about options for, connecting with the landlord. And I put in the chat, is there a way where we can set up like a mediation with the client? Because I remember I when I was in law school, I actually I took mediation, and I thought that was a good format to kind of resolve certain issues and stuff. And I'm wondering if your program has something set up like that, or have you ever done anything like that?
That's not something that we typically do. I could see it happening or maybe being beneficial in some cases. I don't think that we are opposed, but we really do try to reduce the amount of contact that our landlords are having with our participants as much as we can. We try to really be that middle person as much and as often as we can. And I think mainly for some protection and confidentiality reasons of our participants, right? But also, yeah, I think our folks are already dealing with this idea of stigma and shame that is hard to chip away at. So we're also as like a protective factor for our participants. It probably wouldn't be our go-to, right? We trust that our housing department can do their thing, or that our supervisors can do their thing in kind of mediating that issue, because chances are the conflict is not between the tenant and the landlord specifically, right? There's something else here. There are other neighbors or damage to the unit that is the actual issue, not like these people like feuding and hating one another. So what we might do is share that mutual agreement with the landlord. Hey, here's what we met and talked about the participant about and around, and what we plan to do moving forward.
Okay, well, thank you for that answer, because I always felt like, sometimes I know we're the go-to with a middle person, but I just think that sometimes it's good to have everyone have a better understanding as to what's going on with the person. and how the landlord feels about what's going on. And it might also provide some form of education as well. But, that's just my opinion. That's it.
Yeah, no, I do think that there are situations where that might be effective. So I think like taking this on like a case by case scenario, right? And is this going to be effective and keep this person housed, right? Is this going to benefit the participant? I think is a good question to ask when thinking about preparing to do something like that, for sure. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, can I add something else? I also like the part about the master leasing. I'm pretty excited about that. I would love to learn more about the master leasing because I think that's a very supportive idea of getting things done with housing. So thank you for that information as well.
You're welcome. I don't know if we have a lot more like specific info to share. I mean, really specifically, I'll say that like our housing director his name literally shows up on the lease. And so when they want to run a background check or whatever, they run it on him. And so that's our way of doing that. And then, yeah, we do have the use and occupancy agreement so that people can have legal rights to the unit that we're like sort of subleasing to. It's a super helpful intervention. It like just like totally sidesteps a lot of the BS that can be out there. I just want to call out right now, we're 5 past the hour and I know people are leaving. I did drop a link to the course eval in the chat, and I'll do that again. So fill that out if you wouldn't mind, folks. I am able to stay for another couple quick minutes if people have additional questions, but if you got to run, I just want to say thank you so much for joining us. It was great engaging with you. And we look forward to seeing you another time. That would be great.
Hey Ryan, I did like the response you gave, but sometimes that's true. It's always a bit challenging when you're not getting that engagement from the client.
Yeah, and so specifically around the issue of like you've got a mutual agreement that you're trying to put in place, but then you're not even getting them at the table to really even engage in that. Is that kind of like,
yeah,
you can't even get over that hump? I wonder if I can kick this one over to Khalil to talk about what we've done.
Yeah, I think that one of the tools that we use sometimes, and I know I've said it many times during the training, but this idea of clarifying role and purpose sometimes looks like asking the client very outwardly, what are we doing for you right now, right? Is there any services being provided to you, right? We're not engaging very often. You're really not receiving any case management supports anymore. And going from there, right? Because there might be programs that are more fitting for this participant where they're receiving engagement and support in ways that maybe are more fitting for them and their current needs. But I also think that from these conversations, we can learn how we can be supporting somebody, and they're letting us know, like, actually, I'd like to receive support in this way, right? Or here's what's going to work for me. I think guiding things like mutual agreements and treatment plans and personal goal plans in a way that is really client driven, I think is super helpful. I think another thing helpful for this is at that intake and in those initial interactions, make sure that they're aware of these program guidelines from the beginning. And that's something that I've seen in many agencies kind of drop the ball on, right? We're worried about getting as many folks in as we can, right? And providing them housing and services and therapy and all the great things, right? They don't necessarily have a great understanding of what the program actually is and what we are going to require of them, even if it's not that much, right? Here at Pathways, we require a bi-weekly home visit and for them to sign some forms. That's really it, right? But some folks come into the program and make their way through and maybe are unaware of this, right? We drop the ball at some point in explaining this to somebody and kind of need to backtrack and say, hey, this is what you agreed to, right? I'm not sure of how much you understood when you came in, but here's what you agreed to when you came into the program. And we really need to get these done because we want to keep you housed, right? Because I know you want to stay housed, right? This is a goal of yours. I want to support you in that. Let us know what we can do to make this happen.
I wanted to just add on something that Khalil mentioned earlier in the training too. Sometimes what we've ended up having to do when somebody's tenancy is at risk and they're not showing up around these mutual agreement conversations or like responding to them in the ways that we would hope, we have discharged people from housing and maintain service provision, right? Continue to do case management. We're going to rehouse you, but the reality is that there's not enough housing to go around for everybody right now. And so at this point, there is like an eviction that has taken place. We want to continue to learn from that. We're not going to drop you. We're going to continue to support you in as many other ways as we can, but you might not have access to housing for some time frame until we're able to find another place for you. And maybe there are other people in line in front of you, right? And maybe we can even say that up front as part of like our 30-day notice, like we're going to get you rehoused, but you might be in line, and so we'll do services only for a little while. That's another way that we've approached that conversation. Yeah, and so I guess I'll just wrap up and say that like sometimes the loss of housing is unavoidable.
Right.
And so I think your question of like, well, what do we do when they're not showing up? Sometimes we do everything we can, offer all the choices we can, and people will make the choices that they're going to make anyway.
Right.
We have to be okay with that too.
Can I just ask another question? Because I mean, I know I'm asking a lot of
Thank you.
questions, but I got to throw something in here, and I'm sorry if I cut you off. I apologize.
That's
I
fine.
know that
I'm completely done. That's fine. I actually have another meeting to get into. So thank you so much.
Joyce, I'm so sorry. But this is a good, very important question. You might want to catch this. I think that what needs to also be addressed, and I mentioned it before, was the fact that we get people housing and they do a credit report when this person has a guaranteed voucher to pay their rent. Now, I heard that it was in the that is in the Supreme Court. They're addressing some of these agencies that are doing these credit checks. But is there anything happening on you all side that you might know about?
No, on our end, again, we use the master leasing to avoid that. They can still run that credit check, but it's really going to run it on our director of housing or our agency. And so it's not going to meet the need that they think it's going to meet. But the reality is then we're saying to them, hey, for this first time, you're going to rent to one of our folks, run the credit check. That's fine. But what if we skip this in the future? Because you already know what's going to come back, and you already know we're going to pay rent every single time on time because we're a nonprofit that has a steady stream of income. And so, yeah, I hear you, the challenge there. It's not one that we face, but I still think sort of broadly, programs have a responsibility to kind of nurture that landlord relationship in such a way that we're really pulling in people that understand the reality of the background that our folks have, and are willing to work with us and bend some of those rules. It's been tricky sometimes where we've got like a property manager who's responding to a landlord, and one or the other might be willing to flex, but the other is not. And so really kind of nurturing those conversations and building relationship to like, come on, you don't need, it's us, right? We're people. Come on, we're all helping here, right? Like those kinds of conversations we try to have.
Okay, thank you. Have a great
Hosanna,
day.
I see. Thanks, you too. Hosanna, I see your hand raised. Go ahead.
Yes, I just have a question. When like we try everything, but we have to go to housing court, so eviction is real, right? And then we have, so in our programs, most of the time we have case managers going to court and testifying. And we are facing right now a situation where instead of eviction, the judge agreed to a court agreement, right? And then of course the tenant is back in the building, but refusing to work with case management because they went to court to testify against them. So I just want to know what kind of experience you guys have with that. I know that you said that because it's master lease, the going to court is not as much. But if you guys have like any kind of experience, how to prep tenants prior to courts, or what kind of work case managers can do with the tenants prior to court, and when situations like this happen, what kind of approach we can have? Because now we have a tenant telling you, I don't trust you because you just went to court yesterday, and it's kind of hard to rebuild that whole relationship that you had before. So I'm just curious to see what folks have been doing with that to kind of so
I think
yes.
that I'm sorry, are we finished?
No. I was
Okay.
just saying that we're kind of implementing like case managers having like a case prep with tenants. In some situations it works, in some situations it doesn't. Some tenants, when did they get to the let's say the final eviction process, they not even engaging with case management. But so that's why I'm kind of trying to see what recommendation you guys would have.
Yeah. I think that one, so we actually go to eviction court very little. But when we do, because our housing director is somebody from the program will be there to represent Pathways, right? Because that's who's on the lease. And sometimes the participant is involved. I think unfortunately, because of the stigma around mental health and substance abuse, sometimes whoever's facilitating this will ask about what resources we have to provide this person mental health treatment or substance use treatment. And what works in our favor is saying, yeah, we provide that, or we have resources. That doesn't mean, that is completely different than saying we're going to make this participant do that thing, right? But letting them know that we have these supports for somebody, I think has been helpful. And I also think like as much conversation, discussion with the participant about it and about what that looks like if you've done this before and know some of the language that's going to be used that could result in some mistrust, right, with the participant, letting them know like, hey, here's what they're going to say in court, here's how I have to respond, right? I want you to know I'm still on your side and want to keep you housed at the end of the day, right? So that they understand that this is kind of a show, right? It is for anybody in any circumstance, eviction aside, right? We have to say things that sound good, right? That get us what we want and that get our needs met, right? In this case, it is to keep this person housed, hopefully, right? So I think in emphasizing that, like you want to keep them housed in the beginning, as early as you can, and let them know here are some of the things you might hear in court, could maybe do a little bit to kind of avoid some mistrust afterward.
Can I just add to, I like your idea about a prep meeting. That makes a lot of sense, and including some of the stuff that Khalil mentioned. Not every program is able to do this, or like your subsidy will determine whether you're able to do this. But I think this piece that we spent so much time talking about around accountability without termination could be a critical thing to kind of be transparent about with your participant, right? You're going to get evicted from this place, but we don't want to see you unhoused, right? And so either we're doing some preparatory prevention work around, hey, this thing's going haywire, they're going to take you to court. What do we see about moving you to a different unit? Let's start looking for apartments now. They may not want to go down that path because they're very happy in their apartment and they want to fight it tooth and nail. That's a choice that they can make, but that's going to lead to a conflicted relationship with the landlord, even if you get to stay there long term, right? And so we want to help you avoid that. So either we can prep them by saying, hey, let's get out of here. Let's just call this one done. Or we can encourage them and make them aware that, hey, if this goes sideways, we're going to make sure that we try and do everything we can to get you rehoused. That could be a way to kind of demonstrate solidarity. You know, you talked about the way that like trust gets broken through this process. And so like maybe the trust can be rebuilt from a point of, don't worry, we're still with you. Yeah, you're going to lose this spot, but we're going to work to get you into a new spot. I don't know if that's possible in your setting with your types of subsidies, but could be helpful in that way.
Just wanted to ask quickly. I had a
Thank you.
Sorry. Just wanted to ask you quickly, in terms of if the client agrees to go to attend a therapy session and the client agrees but never goes, because I was in that situation myself. The client agreed to go to therapy, but then every time I would check on what happened the last time, well, you know, I had transportation issues, or well, I was able to provide a card, like a Charlie card, you know, help with bus. Same thing. Oh well, last week I had an issue, so I ended up driving the client myself a couple of times, but then I couldn't keep doing that. So the idea would be for the therapist to visit the client, but that was not possible. So I'm wondering what type of
Yeah, it's a good question. If the idea is that, hey, you can stay in this apartment as long as you engage in mental health treatment, like if that's kind of the framework that it's like, let's avoid eviction by making sure that you go in treatment. I just want to offer that as a high fidelity housing first program, our program would never suggest that you have to engage in that treatment, right? We want to make that available as an option always. We want to encourage you, and like you're doing, provide RIZE, provide transportation fare, so that people can get to those appointments if they're making that choice. But as a critical part of the fidelity principles, the fidelity measures that keep us aligned to the model of housing first, requiring treatment at any stage, either in the beginning before they come in or throughout the process, would be kind of anti-housing first. And so even though we know this could be a helpful thing for them, right? Maybe there's a specific behavior cropping up as a result of their mental health that is leading to a threat to their tenancy. Still we wouldn't require that, right? We can strongly encourage, we can make the case for, continue to provide support around, but ultimately never make that requirement. But I think we can have motivational interviewing conversations. I saw you dropping that in the chat a little bit around, hey, this thing could be, you want this tenancy, these behaviors are getting in the way. How are we going to address this? Have you considered this option of treatment? I know you know that, so I know I'm not telling you anything new, but that's how we would have to approach it, because we're not going to make that requirement. Yeah.
Thanks.
I also just want to add that what if they don't needs to kind of be thought about preemptively also and included in this mutual agreement, right? It's important that the mutual agreement lists what happened if somebody isn't really aligned with this and isn't doing these things that they said that they would do, that those things have been thought about and brainstormed between you and the participant before ever even making that agreement.
I just want to add that I put it in the chat. I know I'm talking a lot, but it's because I just love the program that you all have. And we really need more programs like yours, because we have housing assistance, we have contingency funds, but we don't have a program set up quite like yours. And I think that yours is very successful. I can see it being successful because you're covering a lot of the bases to maintain housing. So I want to thank you for that. Thank you for this information.
Yeah, thank you. Folks definitely do get discharged from our program. I'll say that it's not all flowers and roses, but yeah, I think the model is a good one. It works really well. Folks, it's 12:20, so I'm going to close us down. Thank you so much for your time, energy, and engagement. Have a good one, y'all.